Good morning, friends, and welcome to New Garden Friends Meeting. Many faith communities say that they are welcoming, but it is difficult to extend a true, wide welcome. Here at New Garden Friends Meeting, we take this work of welcome very seriously. And we are always working as a community to better welcome everyone who comes through our doors, who comes and worships with us on first days, and who joins our community of friends. You are welcome here at New Garden Friends Meeting. No matter your age, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, no matter your politics, no matter your immigration status, no matter what language was the first language that you spoke, no matter your abilities or your marital status, you are welcome here among friends. No matter where you are on your spiritual journey, whether you consider yourself an agnostic or an atheist, or whether you consider yourself a Christian, whether you are new to Quakerism or whether you are someone who has never before attended worship among friends, you are welcome here at New Garden Friends Meeting. Friends, I have a reading to share with all of you as we begin our worship this first day. Our reading for this morning comes from Britain Yearly Meeting, Faith and Practice. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the tradition of Friends, we do not have any creed or doctrine. There is no hierarchy within our church. There's no outside structure that tells us what to believe or how to worship. But Friends have found it helpful to collect together the writings of early friends and also our shared tradition and understanding as Quakers, which has built up over the years. This has to do with how we are a community together, community of faith. It also gives us guideposts to help direct our faith and our spiritual exploration. These are not rules or doctrine. It is simply a resource that we draw from as Quakers. So there are many communities have a faith and practice that they draw from. Here at New Garden Friends Meeting, we often draw wisdom from several different Quaker faith and practice documents. But the Britain Yearly Meeting, Faith and Practice, is one that we often draw wisdom from together as a community. And if you're interested in reading more of Britain Yearly Meeting, Faith and Practice, it is available in its entirety online. So you can go and you can Google Britain Yearly Meeting, Faith and Practice, and you can see all of it online. I'm reading this morning from section 1947. This section is part of the chapter about our testimonies or our corporate understanding of faith. This particular section is about the peace testimony. The peace testimony. Corporate testimony depends on individual faithfulness. An individual will be faithful through a recognition of the testimony and a searching of the heart to see what steps are required to follow this testimony. This following story depends on oral tradition, but it has played a large part in Quaker thinking, and so we have included it here. And the story follows. When William Penn was convinced of the principles of Friends and became a frequent attender at their meetings, he did not immediately relinquish his gay apparel. It is even said that he wore a sword, as was then customary among men of rank and fashion. Being one day in the company of George Fox, he asked his advice concerning it, saying that he might perhaps appear singular among friends. But his sword had once been the means of saving his life without injuring his antagonist. And moreover, that Christ had said, He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. George Fox answered William Penn this way: I advise thee to wear it as long as thou canst. Not long after this time that they met again, and William had no sword. And George said to him, William, where is thy sword? Oh, said William, I have taken thy advice. I wore it as long as I could. This story is recounted by Samuel Jennings in 1852. I have been holding in my heart the Quaker commitment to peacemaking and the intrinsic link between that commitment, the commitment to peacemaking, and our commitment to justice seeking. Our country has witnessed another shooting of a Black person at the hands of the police. As many of you know, Daunte Wright was only 20 when he was killed as part of a traffic stop. Protests have been taking place in the wake of his killing. And these protests, along with the ongoing news coverage of the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes last spring, resulting in Floyd's death, this conversation, this news coverage has once again brought national attention to our struggle with racism in this country. But of course, with or without the news coverage, racism is America's original sin. It is a constant and continual part of our lives as Americans. The question that those of us who are white must grapple with, if we have not already, is what our faith is calling us to do in the face of this original sin. How are we, as Quakers, a people historically committed to peacemaking, being called forward to confront the system of violence that is systemic racism? In so many ways, this story about William Penn that I shared with all of you this morning is a perfect place for us to launch this conversation this first day. William Penn is a complicated historical figure. Like so many of our white Quaker forebears, he was not a paragon of personal moral virtue. William Penn was an enslaver. He personally enslaved 12 people, but his businesses also profited extensively and were complicit with, in a number of ways, the slave trade. It is important to note this because too often in the past, we have romanticized and idealized our Quaker forebears instead of simply taking the challenges of faith that they have given us and wrestling with them in the context of our modern world. Early Quakers were overall a deeply problematic group, but they have left us with questions but not answers about our faith. Let us not make our forebears into heroes. That is not helpful for us today as a community of faith. Let us instead take their lives and how they wrestled with their faith and the questions that they issued, and let us wrestle with our faith today in our modern world and in our own context. This does not require these forebearers to be heroes. This wrestling, this personal exploration of faith is also at the heart of the meaning of this story about William Penn. When I read this story, I think about Penn's incredible privilege. The privilege that is so clearly represented by the sword that he carried. It represented his wealth, his privileged place within society, and also his sense that he had the right to violently defend himself. Of course, poor people, women, people of color within Penn's society did not carry swords and did not have that right. His sword was an outward mark of his rank, his privilege, and how he benefited in so many ways from systems of violence and oppression in his world. And of course, we know that making the decision not to carry his sword did not change the fact of his privilege, but was merely a first step, perhaps, in recognizing it. He was an enslaver long after he stopped carrying a sword. But this story is an excellent illustration of the difficult personal work that we must do to live into our faith and to confront our own privilege and power. George Fox, in his conversation with Penn, recognized that some of this work must be done internally. Although I wonder when I read this story, if Penn had not given up his sword on his own, would his community, the other Quakers around him, continue to labor with him about it? I hope so. I hope that they would have lovingly and persistently held him accountable to this work of confronting his privilege. That is what we are called to do as a loving community of faith. We are called to nurture and support each other. And sometimes that nurture and that support looks like lovingly challenging one another to be better and to do better. We are always calling out the best within one another. As a community of faith, we are called to support each other, but we are also called to discomfort one another. We are called to be merciful, but we are also called to be peacemakers. And sometimes to be peacemakers, we must make people deeply uncomfortable. As I read this story again about Penn and his sword, I am left wrestling with this question. What is the sword that I carry? I'm left struggling with the reality that for those of us who are white, we all have those deep marks of privilege, those unrecognized ways that we benefit from systems of violence within our world. We are complicit in these systems of oppression, although that complicity may not be as obvious as something that we wear on our hip. That doesn't make it any less real or any less there. We all have swords that we are carrying. This link between peacemaking and justice is undeniably part of our faith. They are two sides of the same coin. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reportedly said, "There can be no justice without peace, and there can be no peace without justice." He said this in the context of his involvement in the struggle to end America's war in Vietnam. He saw this work for peace like the work that he did as part of the Poor People's Campaign, the work to uplift those who lived in poverty, as intrinsically tied to issues of racial justice in our country. They are strands of the same braid. And this, of course, is not a new idea. This idea of peace and justice, the work to uplift those in poverty, the work for racial justice, all of those things being held together is an idea that Reverend Dr. King undoubtedly got from the Bible, because it is all over our scripture. In the book of Jeremiah, in chapter 6, verses 13 through 15, Jeremiah, who is speaking for God as God's prophet, says this: "Everyone is greedy for unjust gain, and from the priest to the prophet, everyone deals falsely. They have treated the wounds of my people carelessly, saying, 'Peace, peace,' when there is no peace. They acted shamefully. They have committed abominations, and yet they are not ashamed." Jeremiah is talking about a culture of oppression. And of course, destruction in the book of Jeremiah is the result of this injustice. And the other message here is that when we call for peace without appropriately confronting the roots of injustice, there can be no real peace. We are simply carelessly binding the wounds of the people. Quakers are a people of faith that are known for our commitment to peacemaking. When I interact in ecumenical circles with other Christians from other denominations, that is one of the things that people almost always know about Quakers, that we are peacemakers, that we are a peace church, that we have a commitment to peacemaking in the world. And in fact, I think many of you who have gathered here for worship this morning are a part of New Garden Friends meeting, at least in part because you were seeking a community of faith that cared about peacemaking in the world. So as peacemakers, the challenge to us this first day, this Sunday, is clear. How are we confronting systemic oppression in our world? And how will you lay down your sword of privilege? How will you not just bind the wounds of the world as if they were not serious, but instead do the harder and deeper work of taking away the occasions that result in violence? How will you persistently and compassionately labor with your families, with your neighbors, with your friends, with strangers even, and with our government around issues of injustice and violence in our world? There are times when we cannot be peacemakers and simply agree to disagree. Sometimes peacemaking asks more of us. Sometimes it asks us to do things that are terribly hard. That is certainly true here in 2021, in the complicated and violent world that we live in the United States. And I wonder, how will we hold ourselves accountable as a community to this difficult work of peacemaking? And how will you allow that peace to grow in your heart, to displace the ways that our culture has taught us to be violent? And how will we change here as a community at New Garden Friends meeting? Change and grow to continue to live into this commitment to peacemaking. There are no easy answers to these questions. We must, each of us, wrestle with them in our own hearts, as our reading for today reminds us. Living into our testimonies, into the traditions of our faith, requires wrestling, and it can be hard and painful work. And it is work that never ceases. It's work we do again and again as people of faith. But the good news that we can lift up this morning is that we are not alone in this work. Although some of the wrestling may have to happen internally within your own heart, we are a community committed together to peacemaking. And because we are a community, we are together in this laboring. We are together in how we strive forward. And we are together in holding one another accountable in loving and supporting and nurturing ways to these difficult questions of faith. There is, of course, another piece of good news for all of us this morning. The Spirit is with us in this work. That living presence, the divine, that is always with us in every moment, is coaxing us towards justice, is persuading us towards love, is opening the door around us and welcoming us in to a new way of being. All around us, love is growing through the work of the Spirit. We must only have eyes to see. So, friends, this morning, let us be peacemakers and justice seekers. Let us be the peacemakers and justice seekers that our families need us to be, that our neighbors need us to be, that our community of faith and our world needs us to be. And friends, when you can, may you lay down your sword. But don't just stop there. May you help the rest of the world lay down their swords as well.